In the spring of 1845, on a Mississippi plantation, 3 black sisters were born into slavery. They were identical triplets, and from the moment of their arrival, the masters found them impossible to control. The whip could not break them. The girls never cried. Instead, they sang, their voices carrying through the night, rattling windows and filling every corner of the estate. Then, one night, they vanished. The cellar stood empty, the journals left unfinished, and the only words left behind were these: they walked out together, humming as the flames followed. Some stories were meant to be erased, but whispers survive. Tonight, we unearth one of them, the unholy case of the Plantation Triplets whom the masters could not control. If stories like this reach you, subscribe to the Macabre Record and tell me in the comments where you're listening from. In 1845, within the state of Mississippi, a case unfolded that was never meant to be spoken of again. It was whispered in corners, scratched into margins, passed down in hushed tones that carried more fear than memory. This was the story of 3 sisters, born together in bondage, who appeared to resist not only their chains but the very men who owned them. They were called triplets, though no ledger ever recorded their names. They were said to move as one, breathe as one, and hum a sound that unsettled all who heard it. And when they disappeared, their absence was so profound, so unexplainable, that the masters themselves tried to erase the evidence with fire and silence. But fragments remain, and within those fragments lies a truth too haunting to ignore. The triplets entered this world beneath a shroud of thunder. Their mother, herself enslaved, labored in a cramped wooden cabin that smelled of rain-soaked earth and blood. By the time the cries had quieted, 3 daughters lay swaddled in rags, identical faces glistening with the sweat of survival. They should have been celebrated as a miracle, but miracles were not permitted in chains. To the overseers, they were a warning. To the master, they were an opportunity. To their mother, they were everything. And yet, they were taken from her arms before the blood had even dried. They were carried not to the fields where other children played and worked, but to the cellar beneath the Hollow Creek plantation house. It was said the master believed they were born for something more than labor. He wished to understand why they had come together, why 3 had emerged where nature should have given 1. And so they were locked away, their lives reduced to a study, their voices reduced to notes in a physician's ledger. But the cellar could not contain them. At night, their humming rose through the floorboards, drifting into the bedrooms of those who pretended not to hear. The sound unsettled the household, yet it comforted the enslaved who slept in the quarters. Some claimed the sisters sang a hymn of freedom. Others believed it was a warning. And as the years passed, the sound grew stronger, until one night, it stopped. The cellar was found empty, the journals unfinished, and the last words anyone dared to record were these: they walked out together, humming as the flames followed. The story begins with a woman whose name was never written, though her body carried the weight of countless histories. Enslaved, she was forced to work until her belly grew too heavy for the fields. And when her time arrived, she was given no midwife, no comfort, only a corner of a wooden cabin and the knowledge that the pain was hers alone. It was in that corner, on a storm-lit night in the spring of 1845, that she brought forth not 1 child, but 3. 3 daughters. 3 identical cries that split the silence of Hollow Creek Plantation. Her arms wrapped around them with trembling urgency, as if she knew the moment would be fleeting. In whispers, she gave them names no one else would ever acknowledge: Sarah, Selah, Serenity. Names like prayers, carried on her breath, pressed into their ears before the overseer's boots thundered at the door. She knew she had only moments. And in those moments, she poured into them everything she could not give in freedom: her love, her protection, her desperate hope. But there was no miracle in bondage. The overseers looked upon the three girls with suspicion. They called them unnatural, cursed, a sign of bad harvests or worse. The master, however, looked upon them with a different hunger. Identical children were rare, he knew, rarer still among the enslaved. To him, they were not daughters, not sisters, not human at all. They were specimens, curiosities to be studied, controlled, and perhaps even sold for profit. Before the mother's sweat had dried, before her arms could memorize the weight of their small bodies, the triplets were taken. Her cries filled the cabin, but cries were of no consequence. She was silenced with threats, silenced with the lash, silenced with the cruel reminder that what came from her body did not belong to her. The girls, swaddled in rough cloth, were carried toward the looming house that ruled over all. They did not enter through the grand doors or the polished halls. They were taken beneath it, to the cellar where stone walls sweated with damp and shadows never lifted. It was there they were placed under lock and key. Their lives were marked not by lullabies or family, but by the scratch of pens and the cold gaze of men who believed science and ownership gave them power over all things. Yet from that cellar, in their first nights together, came a sound no word could silence. Three voices, soft and steady, humming in unison. The masters shifted uneasily in their beds. The enslaved paused in their prayers. And already, a story had begun that chains alone could not contain. From the very beginning, the Hollow Creek triplets were not spoken of in ordinary tones. Their existence itself was a whisper, carried in fear, wonder, and disbelief. Among the enslaved, their birth was seen as a sign, though what it meant depended on who was speaking. Some whispered that the three girls were a gift from God, born to break chains that no iron could hold. Others believed they were marked by spirits older than any Bible brought onto the plantation. Their mother, quiet and watchful, never argued with either view. She simply pressed her lips to their foreheads and called them by the names only she knew, refusing to let their humanity be swallowed by superstition. To the overseers, the sisters were something altogether different. They spoke of curses in the night, muttered of strange omens and the master's poor fortune. It was said that when the triplets were born, the hounds refused to hunt, whining at the edge of the woods as though they smelled something unnatural. The cotton crop that year withered in the field, struck by blight. Men with power and fear in equal measure looked at three small children and saw only a shadow over their profits. The master himself refused to call it a curse. He saw in the sisters not doom, but opportunity. Identical triplets were rare, he reminded the overseers, rarer still in bondage. In his eyes, they were a possession unlike any other, a living anomaly that might earn him reputation, money, perhaps even a place in the journals of respected men. And so he called for physicians, men who carried leather bags and ink-stained ledgers, to see what could be learned from three daughters born of one mother in chains. But what unsettled everyone most was not their likeness, nor their silence, but the sound they made together. Late at night, when the lanterns burned low and the wind curled around the corners of the plantation house, their humming would rise from the cellar. It was not a melody taught by hand or voice. It was something older, something woven between them as naturally as breath. It slipped beneath doors, through cracks in the floor, out into the night air where both master and slave could hear it. And when they did, even the boldest men grew restless. Children covered their ears. Mothers clutched their infants tighter. Overseers drank more than usual. The sound carried something unspoken, something unexplainable, and though no one would admit it aloud, the triplets were no longer simply children. They were an omen's demand to be feared. Beneath the Hollow Creek plantation house lay a cell few dared enter willingly. The air there was always damp, carrying the smell of earth, mold, and rot. The stone walls wept with condensation, streaked with years of neglect. Rats scurried in the corners, their claws scratching the silence, and lanterns gave off little more than a weak glow against shadows that seemed to thicken rather than fade. This was where the triplets were taken, not to be raised among the other children, not to learn the rhythms of work in the fields, but to be contained, studied, and hidden. Their mother begged for them in whispers. She offered to nurse them, to care for them, to take on extra burdens if only she could be with her daughters. But her pleas fell on stone hearts. The master ordered them kept below, away from the others, away from the dangers of superstition spreading through the quarters. There, he said, they would be watched properly, their lives turned into knowledge that could be recorded and controlled. The cellar became their world. The triplets slept on beds of straw, their small frames wrapped in ragged blankets meant more to keep the damp from their bones than to bring comfort. Their food came in wooden bowls, often cold, delivered without words. They learned to move in shadow, to play in silence, to find one another's hands in the dark when the lanterns burned out. They grew in isolation, yet never seemed afraid of it. Those who were forced to descend into the cellar returned with strange stories. A house servant confessed that when she left the bowls at the door, she would hear the sound of 3 voices behind it. Not talking, not crying, but humming. The sound was steady, low, and unsettling, echoing strangely off the stone until it seemed to come from everywhere at once. Some swore it made the air itself vibrate. Even the physicians who came to observe the sisters could not ignore it. They noted their identical appearances, the way they moved together, how their gazes seemed to fall on the same point as if their minds were one. But what they wrote most about, in words heavy with unease, was the sound. They could not describe it adequately, only that it unsettled them, that it lingered in their ears long after they had climbed the cellar stairs. And so the cellar, once a forgotten space beneath the master's home, became a place no one wished to linger. The humming filled it night after night, until it seemed less like a prison and more like a vessel, one that held not 3 children, but something larger than any chain could bind. At first, the sound seemed harmless, a soft humming, like the kind a mother might make to soothe her child. But the Hollow Creek triplets had no mother's arms, no lullaby to follow. The notes they carried came from nowhere anyone could explain. 3 small girls, locked in a cellar, producing tones so perfectly in harmony that it was impossible to believe they had not been taught. It was music without words, steady and low, and once it began, it did not stop. The enslaved who worked in the quarters said the sound drifted through the soil itself, slipping beneath floorboards and walls until it reached them at night. For some, it brought comfort, like a prayer wrapping around their sleep. For others, it stirred unease, a reminder that something in this world was not as it should be. A few whispered that the triplets were touched by spirits older than the chains that bound them, that their song was not meant for men's ears at all. The masters, however, felt something else entirely. When the humming reached their rooms, they could not rest. It clawed at the edges of their sleep, made their hearts beat fast in their chests. They sent men down to silence the children. But no matter how harsh the order, no matter how cruel the punishment, the sound continued. It was not loud, not defiant, but it was unyielding. That, more than anything, unsettled them. The physicians tried to rationalize it. They wrote in their journals of nervous mimicry, of shared instinct, of the peculiar ability of siblings to influence one another's behavior. Yet their words faltered as the night wore on. Some began to hear the humming even when they were far from the cellar. Others admitted in private that the sound followed them into their dreams, where it grew louder, filling halls and corridors that were empty when they woke. For the enslaved children, it was different still. They claimed that if you listened closely, the triplets' humming carried something beneath it. Not just sound, but meaning. Some swore they dreamed of places beyond the fields, rivers that led to freedom, faces they had never seen but somehow recognized. It was as though the sisters sang a map, one too dangerous to speak aloud. Whatever it was, the sound became impossible to ignore. It haunted the nights, lingered in the mornings, and etched itself into every mind at Hollow Creek. And though no one admitted it openly, one truth became clear: the masters could own their bodies, but they could not own the song. In time, the master of Hollow Creek grew restless. His overseers muttered about curses. His servants whispered about spirits. And still, the triplets thrived in the shadows of his cellar. To him, they were more than children. They were a curiosity too rare to waste. And so he sent for physicians from the city, men who dressed in black coats and carried leather satchels filled with instruments gleaming with steel. These men prided themselves on science, on observation, on peeling back the mysteries of nature as one might peel the skin from fruit. When they descended into the cellar, their pens scratched furiously against their ledgers. They measured the girls' heads with calipers, compared the symmetry of their limbs, noted the strange unity in their movements. They pried open their mouths, checked their eyes, listened to their small hearts beating in near-perfect rhythm. One wrote that it was as though the three shared a single pulse. Another described them as unnervingly identical in body and demeanor alike. But none of their measurements could account for the sound. The physicians arrived with the arrogance of reason, but by their second night, that arrogance began to tremble. They wrote of hearing the humming in the cellar, how it rose and fell with no obvious pattern, how it grew louder when they tried to separate the girls, how it filled the air like a vibration rather than a voice. They attempted to silence it, ordering the triplets to stop, even threatening them. Yet the humming persisted, low and steady, as if the sisters answered to no command but their own. Some of the physicians began to lose sleep. They confessed in their private notes that the humming followed them back to their lodgings, echoing in their ears long after they had left the plantation grounds. A few described visions, dreams of water, of chains breaking, of fire in the dark. They did not share these openly. To admit them was to invite ridicule. But in their journals, scrawled hastily between the lines of measurements, the truth seeped out. By the end of their visit, the physicians had no answers. Their ledgers were thick with numbers, sketches, and words that faltered into uncertainty. One journal ended mid-sentence, the ink trailing off the page as though the hand that held the pen had been stilled by something unseen. When the men left Hollow Creek, they carried their satchels with them, but they did not carry peace. The sound lingered, as it always had, bound not to paper, but to the three small girls who would not be silenced. Not all who heard the sound recoiled from it. In the quarters, where families huddled together after days of labor, the enslaved children began to whisper of the sisters in the cellar. At first, they spoke of fear, how the humming slipped beneath the floorboards and crawled into their dreams, how it made the night seem alive. But in time, fear gave way to fascination. Some swore that if you closed your eyes, the sound would carry you beyond the plantation, across the river, into places where no overseer could follow. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss a story. Where are you joining from? Let us know in the comments. Now, let's return to the story.